Hello students, today we are going to discuss the esophagus, part 1. Now in this topic, the specific learning objectives what we are having is, first we are going to discuss the anatomy and physiology of the esophagus and relevant relationship with esophageal diseases. The second learning objective will be to identify the clinical features for various diseases of esophagus. Followed by these two learning objectives, we will discuss the appropriate investigations for various benign and malignant disorders of esophagus, and finally learning objectives will come to the point where we are going to discuss to know and practice the various treatment options available for benign and malignant diseases of this esophagus. In this lecture, we are going to discuss the learning objective first and second. Dear students, any learning process usually involves three components. As you already know, the knowledge component, part of cognitive domain, followed by skill component and attitude and communication. Why I am just enumerating all these three components here is just I am giving you an example. Suppose there is a patient of urinary retention and you want to manage this patient. So you must know the anatomy of urinary bladder. That is a part of knowledge component. You must know how to catheterize that patient. That is a part of skill component. And you will have to take the informed consent, as well as you will have to tell the advantages and disadvantages of this catheterization. This comes under affective domain. So similarly, I will recommend you any topic. If you are going to learn, always think the details of that particular topic in these three headings. Let's start with the esophagus. Esophagus is basically a muscular tube, roughly 25 centimeter in length. It starts from the 6th cervical vertebral level, just at the level of inferior border of cricoid cartilage, and it goes up to the 11th vertebral level, where it joins the cardia of the stomach. First, this esophagus enters the superior mediastinum at the level of C6, where it joins the laryngopharynx, and then it goes in the posterior mediastinum. Most of the esophagus is occupying basically the posterior mediastinum, and the lumen of the esophagus throughout is lined with squamous epithelium. As far as the blood supply is concerned, we can divide the esophagus in two different parts, the thoracic part and abdominal part. The arterial supply for the thoracic part, that comes from branches of thoracic aorta as well as inferior thyroid artery, again a branch of thyrocervical trunk. And venous drainage is basically into the systemic circulation via the branches of aegis vein and inferior thyroid vein. Whereas the abdominal part of this esophagus, the arterial supply is from left gastric artery, a branch of celiac trunk. Again, it is justifying that this esophagus derives from the foregut, and the celiac trunk is an artery of foregut. It is also supplied by the left inferior phrenic artery. One thing is very important regarding the venous drainage of this abdominal part of lower esophagus. This occurs through two routes. and hence forming the portosystemic anastomosis. The first one, the venous drainage goes through the portal circulation via the left gastric vein and to the systemic circulation via the azygous vein. Let's discuss the innervation. The nerve supply for the esophagus is by esophageal plexus, having two supply, the parasympathetic as well as sympathetic. Sympathetic nerve supply for the esophagus, it comes from the cervical and thoracic sympathetic trunks, whereas the parasympathetic is from the vagus nerve, which is a 10th cranial nerve. Important thing about this nerve supply parasympathetic is that upper esophageal sphincter and upper striated muscular part of the esophagus, that is being supplied by fibers coming from the nucleus ambiguous, whereas lower esophageal sphincter and a smooth muscle of lower esophagus, they are supplied by the fibers coming from the dorsal motor nucleus of vagus nerve. These nerve supply, they has synaptic connections to the meninteric, also known as Auerbach's plexus, whereas this Meissner's submucosal plexus is very sparse in the esophagus. Lymphatics. The lymphatic drainage of the esophagus, again we can divide it into three parts: the superior third, the middle third and the lower third. The superior third part of the esophagus, the lymphatic drainage is by deep cervical lymph nodes. Middle third by superior and posterior mediastinal lymph nodes, and the lower third by left gastric and celiac group of lymph nodes. There are four physiological constrictions present in the esophageal lumen, and we can remember these four constrictions level by the mnemonic A, B, C, D. A stands for arch of aorta, followed by bronchus, the left main stem, then cricoid cartilage, and the diaphragmatic hiatus. Obviously, we can rearrange them from craniocaudal point of view. As far as the musculature of the upper esophagus is concerned, it is striated, as well as the musculature of the upper sphincter, again that is striated. It means it is voluntary in nature. We can control the movement. As we go lower down the esophagus, there is a transitional zone of both striated and smooth muscle, and the proportion of the smooth muscle, it progressively increase. In the lower half of the esophagus, we are just going to have only smooth muscle. The take-home message is that the upper part of the esophagus is basically under voluntary control, whereas the middle and the lower part of the esophagus is usually involuntary in nature. The upper esophageal sphincter, as already discussed, consists of powerful striated muscle, whereas the lower esophageal sphincter is more subtle, created by the asymmetrical arrangement of muscle fibers in the distal esophageal wall near the gastroesophageal junction. Here we should remember the distances from upper incisor. Again, it's a clinical application of knowing this fact. The 15, 25 and 40 centimeter for anatomical location during endoscopic procedures. We can use this knowledge as endoscopic landmarks. 0 centimeter, we are starting at the level of incisor teeth. These markings are present over the upper J endoscope. Then at 15 centimeter, we are supposed to have cricopharyngeal constriction. At 25 centimeter, aortic followed by bronchial constriction. And at 40 centimeter, diaphragmatic and sphincter constriction. They vary slightly with the build of the individual, and we can take it roughly as plus minus 2 centimeter. Here you can see we have divided whole of the esophagus basically into three parts: cervical part, thoracic part, and abdominal part, what we have discussed. Now something about esophageal sphincters. The upper esophageal sphincter, normally it is closed at rest and it's an anatomical sphincter, whereas lower esophageal sphincter is predominantly physiological. This upper esophageal sphincter is made up of striated muscle and it is produced by basically cricopharyngeus muscle. What is the function of this upper esophageal sphincter? It serves as a protective mechanism against regurgitation of esophageal contents into the respiratory passages, as well as it stops the air entering the esophagus other than the small amount that enters during swallowing. So two basic function of upper esophageal sphincter: preventing the regurgitation and stopping the air going through the esophagus inside the stomach. As far as the lower esophageal sphincter is concerned, it's a zone of relatively high pressure and it prevents gastric contents from refluxing into the lower esophagus. Basically, this lower esophageal sphincter is a physiological sphincter and it opens in response to a primary peristaltic wave. What is a primary peristaltic wave? Very soon we will discuss this. It also opens in response to whenever we are going to have episodes of vomiting or whenever we are going to burp. At that time it relaxes